So I want to talk here about transition words and transition word questions. Beginning here with an update that I've made to this page. You'll see that the post is dated April 22 of 2023. But since the College Board has made some recent changes in terms of uploading some new tests, getting rid of tests 1 through 3, reusing a bunch of the questions from 1 through 3 on tests 8 through 10, I thought it would be good to sort of do an updated count of the ones that appear the most frequently. I also included the question bank questions, the medium and hard questions, subtracting out the ones that appear on the Blue Book test, and I made this table. And so what this means here is that the word however, the most common one in the answer choices, appears 10 times across, these various test questions and question bank questions. And then I put category here. I don't mean to suggest that everything in a single category is synonymous. So like however and conversely, even though they both indicate a sort of contrast, they're not necessarily identical. On the other hand, nevertheless, and nonetheless, I would say pretty much are identical. And within some of these other categories, like in the conclusion and cause and effect category, the most common one is therefore, accordingly, thus, consequently, hence, and you can see some additional ones. And again, don't mean to suggest that these are completely interchangeable, but it's fairly rare, I would say, that you're going to have two words from the same category in a single question. They're not going to ask you to make a fine distinction between therefore and thus, or therefore and accordingly, or hence and accordingly. Okay, and so, but again, there are some of these that I couldn't really fit into a category, or perhaps they are words that can be used in more than one way, so I didn't want to pigeonhole them. And then as for the questions, and so these examples here come from Resolve Test Prep, and I'll put the link to their site below. They have given me permission to use some of the questions from the free practice test. What I want to emphasize here is that you really want to be starting with the left side of the page. The left side of the page. What you don't want to do on these questions, I think, is you don't want to start plugging words in before you understand the passage. You really want to look at the sentences that are being connected, and it's almost always going to be full sentences. Full sentences that are being connected, and think about how they relate. So in this case, the taste and aroma of coffee are the result of a complex chemical reaction that occurs during the roasting process. Okay, kind of a general statement. Then blank, as coffee beans are heated, they undergo a process called the such and such reaction, Maillard or Maillard reaction, in which sugars and proteins, blah, 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 additionally. So what they're giving here is a lot of, gory details. Well, not gory, but details about this whole process. And so the progression here, the progression of ideas is going from general to specific. So we want a word that indicates that kind of progression of ideas or that kind of transition. And that's exactly what we have here with specifically. But similarly, we definitely don't have a similarity between two things. Nevertheless, we don't have a contrast. And yes, nevertheless is a kind of specific sort of contrast. It's like still, even so, despite what has just been said. But it doesn't work here. And then hence, drawing some sort of conclusion or indicating a cause and effect doesn't work either. And so looking at a couple of more, and I will say more about specific transition word categories and maybe some more challenging examples in later videos. But here, just kind of want to give a little bit more of an overview of how I would recommend approaching these. Okay, so here in the novel 100 Years of Solitude, this author tells the story of a certain family over the course of a century. The same few names repeat in each generation, with the characters echoing their namesakes, traits, and destinies. So their namesakes will be the people that they are named after. Okay, so in the second generation, Remedios is a beautiful child bride who dies suddenly. Blank, in the third generation, another Remedios becomes the most beautiful woman in the world before ascending abruptly to heaven. And so dying suddenly and ascending abruptly to heaven, two ways of indicating the same kind of idea. So we have a similarity. And we also might note that they've kind of foreshadowed this here. So we have this sort of repeating. And so here's something that happens, And here's something else that happens. Now, you might be looking at this and thinking, well, we're going from one generation to another. Maybe that's a matter of, sequence, before and after, or, first, then later. But I think that's sort of overridden by the fact that they are pointing out this similarity. So we could say here, similarly or likewise. And those would really be the two. Those would really be the two that we would expect. Well, you won't see both of them, but, the two that indicate similarity, and that's what we got. So specifically, we just saw in the previous one, thus would go in that same category with hence. And regardless, I think we could throw that in there with nevertheless, still, nonetheless, not exact synonyms, but pretty close. So let's look at one more. It says, Abraham Lincoln won the presidential election of 1860 after securing a mere 39.8% of the popular vote, and he faced stiff competition from within his own party when running for the nomination in 1864. Blank, his role in preservation of the Union during the U.S. Civil War has cemented his status as one of the most popular presidents in American history. And so what we have here is, well, we're going from basically, negative to positive. Negative in the sense that, he didn't get a lot of the votes. He faced stiff competition even from within his own party. But here he is, as it says here, he's popular. So we're going from negative to positive. So that means we have a contrast relationship. And so, looking through these answer choices, in other words, so I call that a restatement sort of transition, or a transition that indicates restatement, because in other words, just like that is, indicates that, well, they're going to restate something, usually in simpler terms. There might be a more complicated point, and then they come back and simplify it a little bit. But that's not going to work here. Therefore, drawing a conclusion, likewise pointing out a similarity, and there's our contrast word, nevertheless. And so, nevertheless, kind of like despite the fact that he wasn't initially that popular and he faced challenges from within his own party, he nonetheless persevered and is now considered a very popular president. And so there's our contrast word. But again, we want to be thinking proactively, left side of the page, think about the ideas, and then go over here. Because the number one mistake I see on these questions when working with students is they might see something out of the corner of their eye, or maybe they're actually just focusing on the answer choices. Then they plug it in, and they end up fitting the second sentence to the transition word and, letting that shape their interpretation. And so if you do that, you can end up, missing the key relationship. It's very similar to what I recommend on the words and context videos, and I should have some videos up about that soon as well. Links will be below, hopefully, if I can remember to do it. But here, again, just an overview of the transition word question type and that list. So you want to certainly make sure that you know the words on that list. And again, I'll try to say more about them and get into some more challenging questions in subsequent videos.